Imagine you have exactly 26 minutes left to live, not because of a sudden illness or a freak accident, but because a computer screen in a bunker deep beneath the mountains of Nebraska just flashed a steady, rhythmic red. Somewhere in the Pacific, a missile has cleared its silo. It is currently arcing through the vacuum of space at 20 times the speed of sound. Its destination? The Pentagon. And because of the way our global defense systems are wired, there is no undo button. There is no calling it back. The clock has started, and for the next 20 minutes, we are going to walk through the end of the world as we know it. Hello, and welcome to the show. Today, we are discussing a book that is as terrifying as it is essential. It's called Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobsen. If you haven't heard of Jacobsen, she is one of the most relentless investigative journalists working today, known for peeling back the layers on Area 51, the CIA, and DARPA. But this time she's done something different. She has taken dozens of interviews with nuclear command and control experts, declassified documents, and cold, hard physics to reconstruct, second by second, what happens if the unthinkable occurs. By the time you finish this episode, you're going to understand the terrifying math of launch on warning. You'll learn why the red phone between world leaders is largely a myth in the heat of the moment, and why the most dangerous thing about a nuclear weapon isn't the explosion itself, but the clock that dictates what happens next. This isn't science fiction. It is the actual protocol that sits on the desks of world leaders right now in 2026. Let's set the stage. The book begins not with a grand political speech, but with a blip. In this specific scenario, Jacobsen explores a rogue launch from North Korea. Why? Because it tests the system in the most chaotic way possible. We start with an SBIRS satellite. That stands for Space-Based Infrared System. These satellites are essentially the eyes of the world, staring down at the Earth, waiting for the specific heat signature of a rocket motor. When that missile lifts off, the satellite sees it instantly, not in minutes, but in seconds. The information travels at the speed of light to Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado. From there, it's a sprint. The data is flashed to Cheyenne Mountain, to the Pentagon, and to the President. And here is where the reality differs from the movies. In Hollywood, the president has hours to debate with generals in a dimly lit room. In reality, the president has roughly 6 minutes to make a decision that will determine the fate of hundreds of millions of people. Think about that. 6 minutes. That's less time than it takes to boil an egg or wait for a bus. In those 6 minutes, the president must be briefed, verify the threat, and decide whether to launch a counterattack. Why the rush? Because of a policy called launch on warning. The logic is grim. If we wait to see where the missile hits, our own missiles might be destroyed in their silos. To ensure mutual assured destruction, we have to fire our weapons while the enemy's missiles are still in the air. It is a use them or lose them system. Jacobsen describes the physical reality of a 1-megaton blast on Washington, D.C., with the clinical precision of a surgeon. When the missile hits the Pentagon, it creates a fireball that is hotter than the center of the sun. For a fraction of a second, the air itself becomes a vacuum. People miles away aren't just killed, they're vaporized. The concrete streets turn to liquid. The oxygen is sucked out of the air to feed a firestorm that can cover hundreds of square miles. But as horrific as that is, the book argues that the explosion is only the beginning of the tragedy. The real catastrophe is the breakdown of communication. In the scenario, the electromagnetic pulse, the EMP, fries the power grid and the communication lines. The fog of war becomes a literal wall of darkness. If the president is evacuated to the doomsday plane, he is effectively cut off from the ground. Decisions are being made with 10% of the facts and 100% of the pressure. Now, before we get into the terrifying ripple effect, how one missile from a rogue state triggers a full-scale exchange with Russia, let's take a quick pause. If this deep dive into the mechanics of the apocalypse is gripping you, please take a moment to follow this podcast and share it. It's conversations like these that remind us why global diplomacy and arms control aren't just political talking points, they are the thin line between us and the scenario we're describing today. If you're enjoying the content, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify goes a long way in helping us reach more listeners. Back to the ticking clock. Jacobsen highlights a concept that most of us never consider, the nutcracker effect. If a nuclear weapon hits a city, the shock wave bounces off the ground and meets the incoming pressure wave, doubling the destructive force. It literally crushes everything in its path like a nut in a cracker. But while the physical buildings are falling, the political structures are falling even faster. In the book scenario, a tragic series of misunderstandings leads to a tit-for-tat escalation. Because the U.S. has to fire its missiles over Russian airspace to hit North Korea, the Russian early warning systems, which are notoriously less sophisticated than the American ones, see a massive launch heading towards them. They don't know it's aimed at North Korea, they just see incoming fire. They have the same 6-minute window, they have the same use it or lose it policy. And just like that, the world moves from a regional conflict to a global extinction event. Jacobsen's research into the continuity of government is particularly chilling. There are bunkers like Raven Rock or Mount Weather designed to save the essential members of the government. But as one of her sources points out, what are they going to govern? If the surface of the Earth is a radioactive wasteland, if the food chain has collapsed, and if the soot from the fires has blocked out the sun for a decade, creating a nuclear winter, then a seat in a bunker isn't a victory, it's just a slower way to die. The book ends by stripping away the statistics and the jargon to look at the human cost. She quotes Nikita Khrushchev, who famously said that in the event of a nuclear war, the living will envy the dead. When the ozone layer is shredded and the global temperature drops by 20 degrees Celsius, the survivors won't be rebuilding society. They will be fighting over the last cans of food in a world where the sun never rises. So, what is the takeaway from Annie Jacobsen's Nuclear War, a Scenario? First, the system is designed for speed, not for sanity. The entire architecture of our nuclear defense relies on human beings making perfect decisions in a state of total terror within a 6-minute window. Second, there is no such thing as a limited nuclear war. Once the first spark is lit, the protocols for escalation are almost impossible to stop. The machine takes over, and the humans become spectators to their own destruction. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this is a choice. These weapons were built by humans, the protocols were written by humans, and they can be dismantled by humans. Annie Jacobsen isn't writing this to scare us into paralysis. She's writing it to wake us up to the reality of the doomsday clock. Thank you for joining me for this heavy but necessary journey. It's easy to look away from topics like this, but understanding the stakes is the first step towards ensuring this scenario remains exactly that, a scenario, and never a reality. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who cares about the future of our world. Until next time, cherish the daylight, keep asking the hard questions, and remember, in a world of 72-minute countdowns, every second of peace is a miracle.